So here's something interesting. I'm standing here at NAMPO Park in Bothaville. This is in the Free State. And it's almost impossible to fully absorb what's happening around us. Over 910 exhibitors, more than 4,000 agricultural products that are on display here across 80 hectares of land. An aviation airfield that people come in to land in here, the farmers. And over the 4 days, every single May becomes one of the busiest privately owned and operated airfields in the world, with 446 aircraft landing here in 2025 alone. That included 69 helicopters ferrying in your corporate executives and commercial farmers alike from across the entire country. Between 1 to 2 billion rand in agricultural trade passes through this ground every single year in just a single week. Not even a week, it's like 4 days. This isn't a trade show, this is an economic event, and the story it tells about South African agriculture is one that deserves to fully be told. I need your attention on this one. What's important to unpack here is that this gathering, known as the NAMPO Harvest Day, is not just the largest agricultural show in the Southern Hemisphere. It is arguably the single most accurate barometer of where South African farming and agriculture actually stands, what also it needs, and where it's headed. And right now, the sector is doing something quite remarkable. When 960,000 jobs are just the starting point of the South African agriculture when we entered 2026, this was real momentum. Now, according to a good friend of mine, Uwandile Sihlobo, who is the chief economist at the Agricultural Business Chamber of South Africa, that's AGBiz, farm employment reached that 960,000 jobs number in the first quarter of 2026, a 3% increase from the same period last year. And this was well above the sector's long-run average of 799,000 jobs. That figure is being driven by genuinely favorable agricultural conditions when it comes to production. La Nina rains that have pushed yields higher, expanded planting seasons, and they've equaled strong performance in horticulture, wine, and even in field crops. Now, the summer grain and oilseed harvest for 25-26 came in at 20.8 million tons, up 1% year on year. And a lot of this was anchored by upward revisions in things like maize, soybean, and sunflower seeds. The South African table grape industry inspected 81.2 million cartons for export in the 25-26 season. This was a 3% increase from the previous year. Increase on increase on increase. The numbers tell an interesting story when we take a closer look across almost every subsector that exists in agriculture that wasn't hit by foot and mouth disease or African swine fever. South African agriculture is in an expansion mode. It's growing, and it's growing consistently. So what does this all look like in practice? Well, I'm actually standing in it, in the Free State. South African agriculture can be best described by what is happening here. When we take a closer look at this, these are people that are invested commercially in what happens here in the South African agricultural space, as well as in NAMPO. This place is very important to South African agriculture. It's not just another trade fair. Look, at certain times, they even have to create a temporary mobile control tower, NAMPO Tower, which operates on its own frequency between 7 and 5 p.m. so that pilots are able to land here. There are no pre-booking slots. It's a pitch and land type of situation. But the aircraft are an indicator of why this place matters. That type of traffic happens because the people landing here are here to make decisions on a dime. According to the organizers Grain SA, 61% of the 87,000 plus visitors who pass through these gates come with explicit intent to purchase. Money exchanges hands here. 52% finalize procurement decisions on site. 32% they execute direct trade contracts on this floor. High-end combined harvesters here run for 2 million rand to over 8 million rand just in a unit. Even in lean years, the spend shifts to precision equipment like utility tractors at around 250,000 rand that you can see almost behind me. The total trade turnover, including deals closed in the 3 to 6 months following this event, all of that is roughly 1 to 2 billion rand annually. And what about Bothaville itself? Well, the town of 46,000 people generates 27 million rand in direct visitor spending during the 4-day event, while corporate exhibitors inject a further 8 million rand into local contractors and suppliers. 750 temporary jobs are created from this NAMPO Expo. The NAMPO Secondary School funds a significant portion of its annual bursaries from the food stalls and the beer gardens that are here over the 4 days. And by the way, their biltong is second to none. The Maize Capital Tourism Forum opens over 200 private homes for accommodation, expanding the town's bed capacity to 5,400, because even that isn't enough to hold the overflow within the 120-kilometer radius. The need to house the people that come to this festival is exponential. That's tourism. Now, is this what we imagine when we think about a farming show? I don't necessarily think so, and it probably shouldn't be, but that shows you the scale of what we're looking at here. But perhaps the most consequential development in South African agriculture in 2026 didn't happen here at NAMPO. It happened in the boardroom, and it came into effect on the 1st of May 2026, 1 week before this show took place. The China-Africa Framework Agreement on Economic Partnership for Shared Prosperity, CAEPA, came into effect. What this meant is that we are opening up a 2-year window of zero tariffs on majority of South Africa's agricultural exports into China. Think fruits, nuts, raisins, wine, meats. All of these now are tariff-free in a market that imports an average of $206 billion in agricultural produce annually. China is the second largest agricultural importer in the entire world, and we have zero rated tariff into that. South Africa currently holds a 0.4% share of that market, and prior to this deal, South African wine exporters, they faced tariffs of up to 14 to 20%. Macadamia nuts, they faced a 12% tariff. Our competitors were Australia, Chile, New Zealand. These were all accessing that market at zero. So we were at a disadvantage up until the 1st of May. Now, we're at the same table now. Another thing that's also worth noting is that this trade diversification comes at a critical time. South Africa's agricultural exports to the US, they fell 39% in Q4 of 2025 to just $81 million as the impact of the so-called Liberation Day tariffs hit us, sitting at 30% to the US. And a lot of that began to bite after a short-lived 90-day pause earlier in the year. Annual exports to the United States in 2025 totaled $504 million, down 3% from the previous year. The China door opening for South Africa isn't just an opportunity, it's actually a strategic necessity that's come at the right time. There's another way to look at the agricultural sector's performance. The maize story adds another layer of complexity. South Africa's 2025-2026 maize production came in at a record 16.8 million tons, which is up 1% from the previous season. This was the largest harvest on record. About 9.1 million tons of white maize, 7.7 million tons of yellow maize. This record crop now enters the 26-27 marketing year and will run straight through to April of 2027, which is a good sign for us. But the 2026-25 marketing year, which ended in April of 26, ended with a quiet note of underperformance on exports. The industry had forecasted exports of 2.4 million tons at the start of the season, and that wasn't necessarily realized. There will be up years and there'll be some sideways years, but we move forward. Final exports came in at around 2 million tons because the usual Far East buyers, Vietnam, Taiwan, South Korea, all of these were absorbing cheaper global maize rather than paying to import from South Africa. And we looked to Zimbabwe to fill that gap, which accounted for 39% of South Africa's total maize exports, approximately 780,000 tons, driven by a lower domestic harvest and growing demands. The thing here is that the Southern African region sustained the trade when global conditions weren't favorable. That has to be said. SADC is important for our agricultural produce. The year ahead may look a whole lot different. South Africa enters the 26-27 season approaching an El Nino weather event. That means that potential dryness, not just locally but across the SADC region, which would reduce regional supply and bring back buyers. It also means the possibility of a slight global maize price recovery, which would revive interest from places like the Far East markets. Maize prices in South Africa are currently around 20 to 30% down from a year ago. When demand recovers, and the expectation is that it will, South Africa sitting on a record carryover stock and a record new crop will be well positioned to take advantage of this. So what does this all mean? Well, every May, a 46,000 person town in the middle of the Free State becomes the heartbeat of an industry that feeds a continent and earns this country billions in foreign exchange. The planes still come. The helicopters, they still circle above us. There's one right now. The combines will still roll across the red soil while farmers negotiate contracts that are worth more than people's lifetimes. Deals that will shape what lands on a table in Harare, what gets shipped out of Durban, and what eventually pours into a glass in Shanghai. South Africa's agricultural industry doesn't wait for permission anymore. It plants, it harvests, it exports. And it does so at a scale that most of us scrolling past a field on a highway don't fully appreciate. The soil here in Bothaville is one of the most productive economic surfaces in the country. What grows in it and what gets decided above it shapes more than a single industry probably should. That's not a burden for the people here. That's a calling. And to me, I think it's worth understanding a whole lot more. Thank you for watching this video right up until this point. I hope that it was just as interesting for you to watch as it was for us to make for you. Maybe check out one of these other videos and hopefully they'll be just as interesting as this one. Cheers.